אדוני, נביאה לצור אישנו, לכו נרננה לאדוני, נביאה לצור אישנו, קדימה, לכו נרננה לאדוני, נביאה לצור אישנו.
Coming to you from San Diego, and we're going to study Torah together today. Now, today is a great day. Today we are in our second portion of the book of Leviticus, or in Hebrew, it's called Vayikra. Now, last week I gave an introduction to the book of Leviticus, and I said that this is the book that most Jewish people begin their children's teaching of the Torah is in the book of Leviticus. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the book that most Christians are like, oh my gosh, there's so much in there that I don't get, and they try to hurry through it. But it really is considered to all the Jewish people the very heart of the Torah. So let me put on my glasses and let's look at the scripture through Hebrew eyes. Okay, so before we get started, I wanted to remind everybody that in your workbook, which is this workbook called A Year Through the Torah for Christians. You can get it on Amazon. This is the workbook that we use. In that, on page 22, there is a prayer that's said prior to Torah study, and I haven't said it in a long time, so I wanted to go ahead and say it today, and you can follow along in the blue. It goes like this: Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzevanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And what that means is, blessed are you, O Lord, our God, who's King of the universe, who sanctifies us, sets us apart as special with his commandments, and commands us to then busy ourselves in the words of the Torah. And that's what we're doing. Remember, we stand on the Jewish people's shoulders spiritually. We are grafted into the tree of faith, Israel's tree of faith, because of the faithful people such as Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, David, etc., etc. So let's get started today. I just wanted to tell you about that prayer again on page 22. Now, there's some more things that are unique about the book of Vayikra, or Leviticus. Its message is what I said, God's heart for Israel. And what is his heart? His heart is to have fellowship with us through drawing near with a sacrifice. Did you know that it's the center book of the 5 books of Moses? So we have Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. So it really is the heart, or the center position of the 5 books of Moses. And this portion today that we're in, called Tzav, is the central Parashah of the whole book of Leviticus. Now, how unique is that? This is why I'm excited to share this with you today, because you're going to see the beauty of what Jesus did on Passover, on the cross, and how that sacrificial system was played out on the cross. I did a visual for you, and I hope that you appreciate it and you can understand what all these sacrifices mean. Did you know also that the book of Leviticus and Tzav contains the middle word of the entire Torah? So it's the middle of God's heart. It's the middle of the 5 books of Moses. This parashah is the middle parashah of all of them, and it contains the middle word of the entire Torah. The middle word is belly. And isn't your belly your center here? You know, I feel things in my gut. And that word is gahon, and it's in Leviticus 11:42. The letter vav here in this word gahon is also the middle letter of all the Torah. This is foundational to our faith, this book. Truth is revealed, and the foreshadowing of the Messiah is done through the sacrificial worship system and man coming near to worship. So this book is key to understanding the whole Bible. If you don't understand Leviticus, everything else is going to be confusing. So let's get started. This parashah is called, as I said, Tzav. Tzav means command, to command. And that's how this portion of scripture begins in Leviticus 6:8. It says, Adonai said to Moses, give this Tzav, command, to Aaron and his sons. So Moses is telling Aaron and his sons what God told him to do. So what's going to happen is they're setting up a ceremony for the very first worship time between Aaron and his sons and the people of Israel. So we're going to do a couple chapters today. We're going to go 6:8 through 8:36. So the title Tzav is also a military term, and it is a command that's immediate and urgent to follow. Okay, so the speed at which you respond to this command is a direct reflection of your expectations of the outcome. So let's say somebody has a gift for you and it's just what you always wanted. And if you were told that and they said, "Come quick, I bought you this special car," you would hightail it out front of your house to go see the car, right? So your expectation is going to determine how quickly you respond. So if you know God and you love God, and when he commands you to do something, then our obedience should be prompt. And that's what I always say. If you hesitate, he who hesitates is lost. Well, if you hesitate, then you're saying that, "Oh, I'm not so sure." So prompt obedience, when God commands, you're to follow, like a military person saying, "Yes, sir." Okay, so it's the expectation that causes us to hurry. So the expectation of God was to have intimacy with his people, and it was to be through the Levitical sacrificial system. Even though he knew that there was sin in all of us because we're fallen people, he still desired to draw us near like a loving father in order to love us and bring us close, and ultimately through the Messiah to heal us spiritually. So this system was set up first to draw us close, but ultimately it would be the Messiah. When he comes, he would draw us close through his life, death, resurrection, ascension, and then giving us the Comforter, his Holy Spirit. So that's where I'm going with this study today. It's rich. So last week we talked about justice, God serving righteousness and justice. It's the same word, tzaddik, in Hebrew. It means both justice and righteousness. And we talked about unintentional sin. Now, if you're like me and like others who emailed me, how do you not know you're sinning? What is unintentional sin? So I did a little snooping around, and I found that even King David realized how difficult it was to be aware of his hidden sins. Look at Psalm 19, 12 through 13. Who can discern his error? Who can really know what is right or wrong in God's mind? "Forgive my hidden faults," King David said. "Keep your servant also from willful sin," that's intentional, "that it not rule over me." So what would be examples of unintentional sin? Well, here's some that I found. Sins of impurity. For example, if you touched a dead body, you'd be considered impure and therefore unacceptable, or you would be called a sinner, because you're unacceptable. You cannot draw close. So touching a dead body, forgetting to take a mikvah. If you were a woman, this is the law of nidah, after your menstrual period, which would then make her unclean before him. Now, why would a woman be considered unclean? Just because she had a menstrual cycle and she didn't take a mikvah? Well, here's why. Because the shedding of the blood of her womb that didn't produce life, it produced death. And so anything associated with death, you'd be considered unclean. So that makes sense, right? Number 3, how about anger or lack of trust or love towards other people or to God? That would be a sin. You'd be unclean, unacceptable. How about if you hurt someone verbally, you slandered them, or you lied about them, or you called somebody a fool when you were frustrated? Or how about just pride? Pride is a sin. Or having a lack of trust, or how about gluttony or selfishness? I mean, there's so many that are unintentional, but are a part of our human fallen nature. So these are a few examples of unintentional sin. Now in John 1:17, it says, "The Torah," or the law, came through Moses, and then we're talking about the Levitical sacrificial system. And grace and truth came through the Messiah, Yeshua HaMashiach. So here's Torah, the law coming through Moses, and then we have a new sacrificial system coming through the Messiah, and that's where I'm going today. So what Jesus said is what he did and reflected who he was. That meant he was trustworthy. So if Jesus said he came to set captives free, he came to heal the sick, to raise the dead, to open the eyes of the blind, these were all prophetic prophecies about the Messiah. And Jesus did all of them. So what he said about the Torah, the Torah, the prophets, the writings, the Torah said that he would do exactly what he did. And therefore, he was trustworthy. Look at the word for truth. He came in the spirit of grace and truth. I love the word truth. It's emet, and here it is in Hebrew. But look at the first two letters. It comes from the same verb as aman because it shares two of the same letters. Aman means to be truthful, okay? It means to be faithful, faithful. So if you came in the spirit of truth, you would be trustworthy and faithful. And look, they share two of the same letters, and so they're cognate sound-alikes, and therefore they're going to share nuance that's similar. So look at the word aman, what it means: trust, faith, truth, and im is the word for mother. It's just different vowel points. These two letters, im is mother. To be reliable, because a mother's reliable. To be relied upon or lasting, to confirm or declare. So ima is, here it is, here's the two letters, the aleph and the mem. This is just a feminine version of mother. And so a mother sustains and is faithful to her child, just like God's truth sustains his children. Do you see how they're called cognates? Phonetic cognates, because they share two of the three root letters. You're going to be learning this in my Hooked on Hebrew class. So please, at the end of this, look at the website and go sign up today. All right, let's continue. So God wanted to show us that if we live in the truth of what the law said, then what was be in our hearts should be expressed through our actions and through the fruit of our lips. Both were like the 5 acceptable sacrifices. And I'm going to go into this in a minute. So if we're truly born again and the truth dwells in us through his spirit, then our actions should match what we say. So see, actions and the fruit of your lips. This is what James was talking about. He said, well, you can say you have faith, but it'll be your actions that are the fruit of what you're saying. So they must match. So being a living sacrifice is what it talks about in the New Testament. And that's also in Psalm 51. So first, there were 3 sacrifices. Remember, we said this last week that were free will. They came, we were giving God a gift because we realized we had sinned in some way unintentionally. So we came to God with free will offerings to enhance our relationship with him. We wanted to come close. The last 2 were required in order to reconcile the violation of the sin and mend our relationship with God. Okay, so both would do that, but 2 were mandatory. So all 5 of them would make us right with God, but 2 were for sure. The others were considered man's gifts given to God with a heart that wants to draw near and confess their sin. So I'm going to show you a picture in a minute, so all this will be clearer. Now, these bringing sacrifices to altars was not something unique to the Jewish people. Matter of fact, I did some research on ancient religions, and here's some of the things that I found. Expert linguists have come to the definite conclusion that all languages come from one mother language or tongue. So you would see that they had, if they all came from one language, and I believe it's Hebrew, and so do many scholars, that you'd see similarities in the ancient pagan religions, because if they all came from Hebrew, and then at the Tower of Babel, the languages were confused, and that's where the nations were split into 70 nations. Well, then you'd see in their religious activity also some similarities. So after the flood, it says Noah and his sons spread out, and generations that followed corrupted the worship system. So Noah originally was sacrificing. He got off the ark and he sacrificed a clean animal on the altar. So the source of perversion was Nimrod at the Tower of Babel. Now, world religions have common echoes of their past because they came from the original worship system. But they're called the Babylon mystery religions, and they all had common themes. So here's what themes were. It would have to do with a man and a woman and a son, and then a resurrection or a reincarnation. All talk about a flood, altars, sacrifices, pride, power, sex. All have a creation story and an end of the world story. So all of these have similarities. And so I just wanted to point that out, that the sacrificial system that God was showing Moses on Mount Sinai was already in place prior to Mount Sinai. Now, to give a sacrifice was not a new concept in this parashah. According to Midrash, which is commentary by the rabbis, Adam, the first man, experienced darkness for the first time the night he had sinned. Why? Well, because he said he realized he was naked. When God removed his presence, his Shekinah, glory, a presence was light. It said that Adam and Eve actually glowed with the same light that God had. And so once God removed his presence, that glow left, and they looked and realized, wow, we're naked. Okay. And they experienced darkness. They experienced night for the first time. They were separated from God, and darkness came that night. And what did he do? It said they sacrificed a bull to God. Now, this is interesting because that's the very first thing in the Levitical sacrificial system that we see when God wanted to renew that relationship. So isn't that interesting that this is what the commentators say in the Hebrew Talmud and oral traditions? So it would be Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, all offered sacrifices on stone altars prior to this book. So the difference was that now God's presence was going to be restored. The presence that was lost and then came through Abraham and the smoking pot, remember, that came through the 5 sacrificial animals. And we see the presence of God being revealed in various ways. But now we're here and he's saying, I want to come and dwell among you. And because of the sin of the golden calf, he left the camp and he put the tabernacle outside the camp of the Israelites, and they had to go out to him. So this is where we are in the story. So the difference is that God is now restoring his presence by establishing this worship system in his Mishkan, or tabernacle. So I'm going to explain that a little further here. I hope you get this. So Leviticus says there are 5 acceptable sacrifices. I already went over this. So what were they? The burnt offering, here it is in Hebrew, the olah, meaning to ascend or go up. So remember that. One sacrifice is about ascending or going up. The second one, the meal or the grain one, was to satisfy, and it's called mincha, the mincha. Okay, nakah means to satisfy. Here's the root word nakah, but the means by which you satisfy is you bring a meal offering or a grain offering as a gift. The third one, okay, so this was a burnt offering that goes up. Then we have the bread or grain to satisfy. Then we have the peace offering, the shalamim, which means to harmonize or create wholeness. So these 3 free will sacrifices all have these meanings tied to them. And I'm going to show you that in a minute, how it applies to the cross. The fourth and fifth, as I said, were mandatory. One was about sin and the other was guilt. So the hatat means to remove from the source of life or diverge from the way or the path. What did Jesus say? I am the way. Okay, so he wants to bring us back on the path because we've sinned and diverged from the path. Therefore, we have been removed from the source of life, just like Adam was removed from the garden and he experienced darkness and separation from God. So now sin separates Israel from God, and he wants to bring them back so that they can live in his spirit of truth and trust and grace and mercy. So the other one is the guilt offering called the asham. And I said last week, that sounds like a shame, doesn't it? So it means to self-destruct because of our guilt. Oh my goodness. Look how many people in our culture today are anxious, full of anxiety, depressed, on antidepressants, suicidal. Teenagers today have a higher rate of suicide in any time in history. And why? Because I believe they are so full of their own guilt, because they see that the culture has taken them off the path and they're separated from God and they feel it. They don't know what the void is, but they try to fill it with all these things that never satisfy. You see, this grain offering, the bread, the grain, was to be a satisfying offering that would satisfy God. So when we realize we're not satisfying God because of we know what we're doing wrong because of our conscience, we become depressed and we become isolated and separated and full of self-destruction. You can see the pattern right here in these sacrifices. So let me show you the cross. I did a complete whole summer study on wherever justice and grace, or righteousness and justice, were found all throughout the Old Testament. And I forget how many times I counted that they were coupled together. Why? Because I said it's the same word. So it says, justice and righteousness are the foundations of his throne. And this is in, oh, I forgot to put that in there. I'll put it in at the end when I send you the PowerPoint. And if you don't get my PowerPoints, by the way, you can email me at rjleibus@gmail.com, and you'll not only get the recorded teachings by people that just follow me on YouTube, but you'll also get these PowerPoints I'm teaching with, so you can have them for yourself, share them with your friends in your church or whatever. So I will give you that at the end. And if I forget, somebody email me. Okay, so all of these sacrifices are what? Placed on the altar by who? The high priest, the Kohen Gadol. Okay, so the person brings the sacrifice, hands it to the high priest. He places the sacrifice on the altar. Okay, let's look at the two mandatory ones, which were the sin and guilt offering. These two were to satisfy God. Let's look at them. The blood and the fat would be put on the altar and the rest burned where? Outside the camp. Now, Jesus went outside the camp when he was crucified on the hill at Golgotha. And so that is one picture shown in the crucifixion of Yeshua. And then guilt offering. Okay, when you brought that, then it would cleanse your conscience and it purified the worshiper. It brings justice and satisfies God for sins of also omission, things we don't do that we should have done. So there's sins of commission and omission. So it covered both sins, intentional, unintentional, and it covered, there was no sacrifice for intentional. I shouldn't have said that. It's only for unintentional sin or sins of omission. So these two satisfied God. Then these three free will ones man would be satisfied in his conscience, and he would feel close again to God. So this one satisfied God's justice and righteousness, and so did these. To man, our conscience would be at ease before God, and we wouldn't feel condemned anymore. That's why in the New Testament it says, therefore, there is now no condemnation for those that are what? In Christ Jesus, Yeshua HaMashiach. So look, the cross was a picture of righteousness being satisfied as well as justice in these offerings that would satisfy both God and man. So the burnt offering was done in the morning and evening. They offered grain. They would lay their hands on the grain and confess their sin. And they would offer this burnt offering. It would be a lamb or whatever they could afford. If they couldn't afford, they were poor and they couldn't afford an animal, then they could bring the grain. Isn't that beautiful that God would do that? So it was offered with grain. Then there'd be the grain offering with wine poured on top of it. This is the mincha offering, and it was to satisfy. So it would be the finest ground grain. They'd add salt and frankincense and oil to this grain, and they'd make like a cake, but no leaven. And the priest would eat some of it, and then wine would be poured on it. So it's both the priest and the worshiper who would eat of this grain and wine. Now, what does that remind you of? It's like communion, the bread and the wine. Okay, so this would satisfy the conscience of those that were guilty before God. So then the peace offering would be the fellowship, because what? Now that God was satisfied with the two mandatory ones, and we were satisfied, we'd have peace with God. That would be the end result. And so it's called the fellowship offering. They'd bring an animal and grain, they'd lay the hands on it, but in this particular peace offering, there was no confession, only thanksgiving. Wow. So when it was all accomplished, he left us peace. And this is exactly what he did when he said, if I don't go, I can't send the Comforter. The Comforter would bring us peace and reveal truth in the inner man. So these five sacrifices is everything that Jesus would accomplish on the cross coming up in this spring season. So both the sin and the guilt offerings were what? On the north side of the altar. Now, why is that significant? Remember I said back a few teachings back that north is the word Zaphon. Zaphon means hidden in Hebrew. It's also the word for your conscience because no one can see it. So the priest would take the sin and the guilt offering and put it over on the right side of the altar, as if to say it's hidden. Okay, hidden from God, it's taken care of. And this is what I love. He says he remembers our sin no more. Though they be as scarlet, they'll be white because what? They're hidden. And isn't that interesting that David prayed for my hidden sins to be forgiven? And so these two offerings were different from the other three because they were done on the north side of the altar, as if to say, your conscience now can be clear of these hidden sins, and it wouldn't bring shame to the person that was bringing them. Okay, so it would be at the right hand of the high priest. This was to symbolize that the conscience was free of shame, guilt, and condemnation. Moses then began, after this, a 7-day consecration ceremony of the tabernacle. Oh my goodness, 7-day consecration ceremony. This is exactly how many days they celebrate the Feast of Unleavened Bread, 7 days. This is so beautiful as we look back and forth like a ping pong ball, New Testament, Old Testament, New Testament, back and forth, back and forth. So what was this 7-day consecration ceremony? It was sequential, and this is exactly the sequence that the worshiper was to go through. First, gathered all of them to the Mishkan, okay? It's like everybody coming to worship, like going to church. Then he washed Aaron and his sons to make the high priests acceptable to God, clean, like taking a mikvah, okay? Jesus is our high priest. He was the only one that lived unblemished. And that's why they wanted the unblemished lamb at Passover. So then they would anoint Aaron and his sons with oil. And Jesus, Mashiach, means to anoint or to smear oil. So Messiah is the same thing, to be anointed with oil. That's what they did to Aaron and his sons. Then they anointed the whole Mishkan with this holy oil. And that's the presence of God, the Holy Spirit in us. So they would anoint Aaron's head, sanctify him as the high priest, the Kohen Gadol. And it's interesting that Jesus was anointed by Mary prior to Passover, right? That she took the expensive perfumed oil and anointed him and washed his feet. Well, this is like washing the high priest here in this ceremony. And then Aaron laid his hands on the head of the bull. Remember, it said Adam sacrificed a bull when he was in darkness? Well, look, here it is. It shows up right here. They would bring a bull, and this was for the entire nation's sin. So just as Adam was the first one who sinned in the Old Testament, Jesus, the Messiah, is called the second Adam, who would take away the sin of not only Israel, but of the whole world. So its blood would then be poured on the altar or the mercy seat in that holy of holies where only the high priest could go. The body would be burned then outside the camp, totally consumed. And so it'd be hidden away from the worshipers. And that's exactly what happened when Jesus was put in the ground. And then 7 days from the time he rose from the dead to the 7 days after that were considered the days of unleavened bread for 7 days. So this is all a picture of the Passover. And that's why I believe we Christians can actually celebrate this and rejoice and bring up these things as we teach others the significance of Jesus' life, death, resurrection, ascension, and taking the blood to the heavenly altar, which he still is seated at where? The right hand of the Father. Isn't that appropriate? Because where did the guilt and shame offering get offered? At the right hand of the one offering the blood. And so it says he's seated at the right hand of the Father, equal in position and equal in character. So this is all something that we can enjoy and celebrate as Christians. So this is the pattern on how we're to approach when we come into worship. We come into his house, we draw near, we're consumed by what? Not fire, by his love. Our hearts burn for him. And we freely surrender ourselves as a living sacrifice. And instead of confessing sin with the peace offering, the shalamim, we thank him with a heart that's grateful and our hearts are at peace. And then we confess our sin and brokenness, just like the hatat, and we receive complete forgiveness. We have no more guilt. And so we have peace with God. And so this is why we fellowship. It's called the fellowship offering. So look, this is not antiquated, outdated. It was just fulfilled in the Messiah. And now that system has been replaced by a better promise. And I'm going to tell you what that means next. So as part of this consecration ceremony of this first worship service, Moses placed the blood of a ram, which is really an adult lamb, at the third year. A sheep is considered a ram. So they take the blood of the adult lamb, called a ram, and they'd put some of the blood on the ear, thumb, and big toe of the high priest. Why? That seems crazy. These represented God's empowerments. And this is what many of the Messianic Jewish rabbis call the 10 Commandments, the 10 empowerments. In other words, when we follow them, we're going to have a great relationship with God and with others. So, what was it on the earlobe? Symbolic of hearing God's voice and obeying it. Shema means hear, obey. Same word. And then you put it on your thumb because you're given favor on your right hand. See, the right hand of favor. And the right hand is our strength hand. And that's our grip. The thumb, by the way, is symbolic of the grip or the strength of the right hand. Without your thumb, you don't have the same strength. So it's put on the thumb because the thumb determines the grip. And I love that. And then put on the big toe because the big toe is out first and it leads us. So it's the direction of our walk, our faith walk. All of these actions symbolize our readiness to perform his duties, which are what? To share the good news, to love others, and to love God as we love ourselves. And so do it in humility, in faithfulness, and in love. So our every act of righteousness, we can call them our mitzvah, done under the inspiration and motivation of the Spirit, is helping God build his house spiritually, not the one seen that's stones, but it's a new holy temple. We are now the temple, and the body of Christ is being built as a temple symbolic to the old sacrificial system in the Mishkan and then ultimately in the temple. So each of us are living stones. That's what it talks about in the New Testament. Each of us takes our place in the building of God's kingdom here on earth. Now, instead of a temple, we are building his kingdom, and he's the king. See? So all of us are living stones to build his kingdom now. The more people, the more stones, the sooner his kingdom is built. And that's why Jesus taught them to pray, thy kingdom come, thy will, laws, 10 commandments, empowerments, be done on earth as it is in heaven, where it's holy, righteous, just, and good. Now it's lived out with the presence of the Spirit in us as we follow our King and Messiah, Yeshua HaMashiach. So thy kingdom come, and that's what we're living in now, to bring his kingdom here on earth. So Yeshua is our high priest who's willing to go outside the camp. He left his place in heaven and was totally consumed, his death on the tree, as the sacrificial Pesach lamb. His blood was applied to a heavenly altar. Okay. Then he rose up from the dead, just like the Olah offering, when he conquered death. So justice and righteousness were accomplished. God was satisfied with the sacrifice of Messiah. Wow. So let me show you the word satisfied in Hebrew. I'm almost done. I only have 1 or 2 slides. The word to be satisfied is sava. Look, it's shin, vet, ayin. And look at the word to dwell, sheva. Same letter, but just the dot, instead of being on this side, in the word satisfied, the dot is on this side, and now it's the SH sound. Same 3 letters, the shin and the sin are the same. They just pronounced either with an S sound or a SH sound. But look at how these words, sava, sheva, mean to be satisfied and to dwell together. Oh, put this in your Bible. This is so beautiful. And then look at, these are also called sound-alike words. Listen to this. Just listen. Sava, sheva, sava, sava. That's all these 4 words. But instead of an SH sound, as in the shin, you have the tsadi, which is a tsa, tsa, instead of sha, It's sa. These are called sibilants because they make a S sound, but it's sa instead of sha or sa. So Sava is the exact same as Saba here, but it's with a different letter and a different ending. You see that? And then this V sound of the vet is also this letter Vav, and it's also a different word, but it sounds like Saba, Sava, just different letters. Why should I care? Look how important this is. Sava means to gather under one leader, and it's a command. Now, remember how we started? I said this parashah is called Tzav. Well, that's it right here. He was calling all of Israel to gather under one leader with the commands so that we could draw near and his justice and righteousness could be satisfied. Hebrews 7:11 through 23 talks about the Levitical priesthood and that sacrificial system. Here's what it says. The Levitical priesthood and its sacrifices, which we just talked about, were temporary coverings. Couldn't take away sin. It was incomplete. Okay? It was not perfect. So it could only cover sin. The service was incomplete because it would end with the death of the high priest. So when that high priest died, guess what? There was no more sacrifice. So they had to bring up another high priest. And now he would do the same thing year after year after year. And then that priest would die. It could never be completely taken away. It would just be this continuous cycle of covering and covering and covering and covering. Because the cycle continued without permanent justice or righteousness. No tree, no sacrifice on the tree. If it had been possible to reach the goal, which was justice and righteousness forever, if it could reach the goal of holiness through the Levitical sacrificial system and its priests, then why did the prophet speak of one to come who would be compared to Melchizedek, who lived forever? And you're like, what? Wait, what does that mean? Okay, I laid down the principles of these 5 sacrifices and showed you how it compared to the new sacrificial system, which was the Paschal Lamb. But he was of a different priesthood. Remember, the priesthood in the Levitical system had to come through Aaron, the Levites. But Messiah didn't come from the Levites. He came from the tribe of Judah, not Levitical system. But wait, there's more. Okay, let me continue. There's more. The prophet said, no, the one to come would come through a different system, different sacrificial system, and a different priesthood. 2 things, different. So he lives forever. Look at Psalm 110:4. David gives dominion to a king who lives forever like Melchizedek lives forever and remains where? Seated at the right hand of God. Remember the sin and guilt offering, the north of the altar, at the priest's right hand? Okay, so even Psalm 110 speaks of a king that would come, that would live forever like Melchizedek, who had no beginning or end. Many believe Melchizedek, who greeted Abraham when he came back and gave him what? Bread and wine, the peace offering. Oh my goodness. Some say this was the Messiah himself. For if the system of the Kohanim was transformed, then the one to come would also transform that sacrificial system. Yeshua belonged to a different tribe. He wasn't of the tribe of the Levites. He was from Judah. But this one who would come not under the tribe of Judah, even though he was from Judah, but he was like the priest of Melchizedek, who would live forever and have an indestructible life. He would be seated forever at the right hand of God, making intercession for us because of his blood. He is the Paschal Lamb with no beginning and no end. Every day We are to bring our weaknesses to his altar. And he burns away more and more of the old Rebecca Levis, the old Judy, the old Ryan, the old whoever. Okay. And we burn away more of the old self, which is of the night. Okay. And we begin to reflect his light, which is of the day. So when he says, when you see the day approaching, they're speaking of the day of revelation. That's what light brings. So Psalm 110:3 is prophetic. It says this: the Lord will hold out his scepter as a king from Zion, it's Jerusalem, saying, rule in the midst of your enemies. Your people, Israel, will what? Volunteer freely on the day of your power when he returns. In holy splendor from where? The womb of the dawn. That's where light comes from. See, it's an idiom. So this king who's going to come and rule is going to come like light comes, light of the day. Okay. Your youth are to you as the dew. What does that mean? Again, that's an idiom. The dew is new, fresh water every morning, right? Adonai has sworn in an oath, promises, and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever, the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, according to the order of Melchizedek. So you know what? In the morning, what I do, not so much in the winter, but as soon as it gets warmer, I go out in the morning and I greet the sun. I raise my hand. And I thought, as I turned around, I saw my shadow on the fence and I said, oh, I'm going to take my picture because I was teaching on the shadow. The shadow is the word tzelem, which means image. So we are, when we worship, an image of the worship of the Old Testament, but now played out as we worship as the sun, S-O-N, rises like the dawn over us. So every morning we can rise up to worship, take delight in that worship as we worship him. And I always say, I go out and I greet the S-O-N as the sun dawns. And when that happens, that ignites this new fire or passion in me. And my heart is rekindled, just like the high priest rekindled the light in the service of the tabernacle and temple every day, morning and night. Well, this is where the sacrifices were done. Remember, morning and evening. That first burnt offering was morning and evening. Well, we rekindle our relationship in the morning when we rise and at night when we go to bed. This is when they say their Shema, to hear and obey, every morning, every night. Isn't that beautiful? So he is our high priest, Yeshua, who lives forever as our high priest. Oh, I hope that you understood what I was saying today. This time that we're celebrating right now is so, so beautiful. If you want to celebrate that, it's not too late to order some Seder books from a Messianic perspective, and you can get them on different sites, but I want to show you one now. It's from the First Fruits of Zion, and you can go to their website and it'll show you where you can order your Haggadah, which is the booklet that you use to guide you through the Seder. And it doesn't have to be, a 3-hour long service. You can do a modified version and just show the significance of what they do, and we can apply that to the cross like I just taught you here, and share that with your friends. So you could begin in just baby steps doing this. I could see home groups doing this and Bible study groups saying, hey, let's have a Passover Seder. And the more you do it, the better you get it, the more meaningful this season becomes in our hearts as we burn with passion for our Paschal Lamb.